Hello, welcome to my podcast. Today I want to talk about the mental bucket, and this is very, very important, the connection that we have mentally with one another, because this is what actually runs the relationship quite strongly. When you have a strong mental connection with each other, you can understand what you're saying, and when you communicate, there's an ease around it because you're both on the same page. And we all know that we've all got different intellectual capacities that vary. However, if we're about the same or in the same range, we can easily understand each other. The mental connection is very important, especially for a lot of people. They want to be with somebody, a partner who they can talk about lots of things with, discuss politics or ideas or visions and even explanations of things. And these things will make a very big difference when you're trying to do different sorts of projects. When we first meet someone, that is the connection that we have. It's a mental connection because we start to speak to them, and by speaking to them we start to understand where they're at and what they do and what they're interested in, and then we can start sharing our lives with each other, because that's what the mental connection is. It's the sharing mentally of our lives with one another. We'll come home and talk about work. We might talk about some project we're doing. We might talk about some idea that we heard or some podcast we listen to, and the other person can understand what we're saying. And that's the important thing, that the understanding is clear for both of you. You can both be basically on the same page and talk about something like, I don't know, something scientific that you'll both be able to follow. Following each other mentally is very important because this is what keeps a very strong connection in your relationship, to be able to talk about a variety of subjects and know that the other person's understanding what you're saying. Of course, if you're talking to someone who's a physicist and they're explaining some completely unknown theorem to you, you might find that difficult, but even within that, they will probably be able to down it to you and give it to you in some sort of way that you can actually understand it, so they can actually make it understandable to you, even though it's a very complicated idea that they're trying to explain. The mental thing also means that we're connected to each other quite telepathically. And I think you want to understand this, that we have a telepathy that goes on between people who are connected, and this telepathy can be quite strong. So we will pick up on them quite easily because our mind meets their mind and it's always joined. So therefore, we will think about the person and they'll ring us, or we'll have an idea with the person and then they'll come home and they'll have the same idea. Often people who are mentally connected actually speak at the same time. It's really funny to see they'll actually start talking at the same time and actually saying the same thing. And they often come up with the same ideas at the same time. And this shows that incredible connection that we have. The mental connection is also important when you're discussing relationship problems, that you can both follow each other and understand what the other person's saying. And sometimes that's also got to do with language. If you have a wide expanse of language and your partner doesn't, then the communication won't be as good. It's a little bit like if I am trying to talk to someone and they can't quite understand me and I don't choose to change how I speak, then we won't have the mental connection. Lots of people who want to have children also want to be with someone who's got the same mental connection and abilities as they have, because then their children will genetically be like that. So if you're fairly artistic, you might want to be with someone who's artistic, or if you're musical, likewise. And if you're an intellectual, you might want to choose to be with someone who's intellectual. It really is just your choice. And we don't always choose who we love, but the mental connection and the mental abilities of both people will really impact on the relationship. That's why when we're with a partner and we're older and they begin to get dementia, we really feel like we lose part of the relationship because we're not connecting mentally like we were. We can't speak to them in the same way, and we can't have an in-depth conversation with them very often, and therefore there's a loss in the relationship, and it's almost as if the part of the relationship actually dies. And that's a good way for you to understand it, really, because people just don't realise how important that connection really is, because without it, you don't have as much going on in your relationship. There can also be breakdowns in relationships when you stop really speaking to each other and you're not having many interesting conversations, or you're not bringing much to the table, and it's just the old humdrum of life. And that's when I think you need to both get an interest together, and that's mentally stimulating for both of you, or start talking about things, or sharing docos or podcasts that you've had to keep that stimulation going. Because if your partner is not mentally stimulating for you and they've become lazy in that area, and some people actually do after they've been in a relationship for a while, they just get a bit lazy and you're just there and they don't really talk to you as much or whatever, then you need to really kick that again and get it started. Because that is a really important part. The emotional part's important, but the mental part's important because that's where we speak to each other and that's where we hear each other. And this part is very important to keep the relationship healthy. Many of us know this intuitively, and when we went to choose someone that we want to be with or share life with, we will choose someone who's probably about the same mentally as us, and also mentally the same as a communicator, particularly within the relationship. You might be with someone who's shy socially, but when you're with them, they talk quite easily to you, and you have a lot of chats and talks about things, and that's important. The mental communication is important too for the relationship, because you might need to talk about issues and problems that are coming up, and you have to be able to understand one another. I always used to have this little way with my husband. I used to say what I thought, and then I would say to him, "So what did you hear me saying? Tell me what you thought I said." And then he would say something back. Frequently it wasn't what I meant to communicate, and then I could say to him, "Well, actually, I didn't really mean it that way." And I think that's a really good thing for you to do with your partner. Ask them what they heard you say, because it isn't what you said. I remember saying to him I wanted to spend more time together, like quality time. And I said, "What did you think I said?" He said, "You want to be with me all the time." And I went, "No." And we had a bit of a laugh, and we went back and redid it and framed it, and then we could both understand. So that's a really good way for you in a relationship to find out if your communication to them is actually what they're hearing, because what we say and what they hear are two different things. And it's very powerful when you do that, because people don't always hear or take it on board what we actually said. They'll hear something else. So try that one. That works very, very well. It's important to keep this part alive too, so you don't get bored. If you're with somebody who's very intellectually and mentally stimulating for you and exciting to be with and interesting to be with, it will keep the relationship alive. However, if your partner starts to become humdrum and boring and doesn't make much effort in this area anymore, because now you're together, you will actually find it really impacts on your relationship, and you will get bored, and you will find you get maybe a little cranky. It's important that you both talk about this and you both keep this part of your relationship alive and healthy. It's also good for you as well to keep fostering your mental capacity and learning and expanding yourself and becoming more knowledgeable about things, and also to have curiosity and always want to find out and always want to learn things. You might not always be talking about the same subject, but it doesn't matter. It's the enthusiasm and the passion of what you have in whatever you're doing. So if someone else is interested in something else in your relationship to you, you can still mentally enjoy the connection and the chat you have about it, even though you might not exactly be following down that path. Keep this one very strong. It's very important, because people don't understand that we actually grow cords between one another, and the cords we have between each other mentally are very strong, and they're very necessary to hold the relationship in place and tight, and also to keep it from nourishing you mentally, and keeping it alive and keeping it happy and passionate, because you're talking about this or that. Communication is one of the biggest areas in a good relationship, and when we cease to communicate clearly or properly, or even stop making an effort, then that part of the relationship kind of dies. And this part is really important. It's important too for you to understand what you need, like how much mental stimulation you actually need as a person. We can get it from other things, and I think it's a good thing to have two lives, the life when we're in a partnership and get it, and then our personal life when we get it. But you do want to have it in your relationship too. You don't want to just be feeding yourself all the time with all the things you're doing and then be actually bored in the relationship. Once you start becoming bored, that's when you get into trouble. And I feel that's what you've got to look at. If you're starting to be bored by the conversations that you're having, start seeing if you can ramp them up a little bit. Because at the beginning, it was exciting and everyone was talking and sharing, and that made it great. The other thing is too that being mentally compatible will make it that you don't actually misinterpret one another, that you do understand what the other person's actually saying in general terms. This is very important because when we don't communicate well or the other person doesn't understand it, then we'll end up having lots and lots of problems. So work on this. It is a very important one. For some people, the mental connection is more important than other people, and you have to work out what it is for you. I feel personally that for me it was very, very important. I needed to have it, and I wanted to be with someone who was as equally capable as I was. And even though we had different interests, that we could follow each other and follow the mental connection that we had and be able to understand each other. So have a look at this one, and if your bucket's not working, talk to your partner about it and see if you can ramp it up a little bit and get back to what you were. Sometimes it is a little bit of people get a bit lazy, so they'll mentally use it all for work and they'll come home and maybe not talk to you or just talk about boring things. And you need to make sure that you keep this part alive and well and healthy, because if it doesn't, you'll find it really does impact on your relationship in a negative way. So I'm wishing you good luck with this one.